Hello you beautiful people, Aaron here, back with another video. Yes, it's Mr. Fandango time. Today we're reviewing his kit, seeing what he could do, how well, and what works best with him. I want to hurry through this video as there's a lot of information to go through, like really there's a massive amount. Longest script I have ever written. So let's get into it. We'll start with an overview of what SCARAMOUCHE does and what his focus is, but before I get into that, it's begging time. So if you like my stuff, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. Also, there are chapters in the description for all of you to be able to find out exactly what you're looking for. Alright, let's get right into it. Well, SCARAMOUCHE is an on-field animal main DPS unit with a focus on normal attacks. His normal attacks themselves have a decently sized AoE, but they don't deal too much damage. That's where his elemental skill comes in. Scar's elemental skill has him enter a stance that grants his normal and charge attacks intense damage bonuses and makes it so that his charge attacks do not consume stamina. On top of that, it also allows him to fly for a set duration. This duration is based on a special meter of his that slowly goes down over time and depletes quicker when he flies upwards and sprints forwards. After the meter depletes, this stance ends and he loses his flight as well as buffs. By default, this stance lasts about 8 seconds, during which he can get off about 4.5 normal attack strings without any attack speed. His elemental burst is an AoE damaging area that hits 5 times in a short amount of time for a major chunk of damage. Then we have his ascension passives. His first ascension grants him up to 2 buffs depending on what element his elemental skill comes into contact with. Hydro grants him extra points for the meter of his elemental skill, Pyro increases his attack by a good chunk, Cryo increases his crit rate by a good amount, and Electro allows his normal attacks to generate energy to himself. His Ascension 4 passive grants Scara a % chance that increases when he makes normal or charge attacks to gain a buff that makes his next sprint instance not consume any of his elemental skills meter. When this happens, he will also send off 4 arrows at a single target and deal minuscule damage. And finally, his animal application seems normal across the board. Now I want to take a look at his first 2 constellations for all those who are thinking about pulling for SCARAMOUCHE's constellations. I'm only looking at the first 2 because the people who are going to pull for his C6 are those who are going to do so regardless of how good they are. So this is specifically for all those with a budget. For this section and all sections beyond, SCARAMOUCHE is at a decently high investment, but I have lowered it a bit in comparison to my previous videos to make it more attainable than it was before. I will be using his signature weapon, Tule's Remembrance, which I will now be calling Tule from now on, and a 4-star weapon that all of you voted for, which turned out to be the Woodsith by a pretty wide margin. I will also be using him with his signature set, the Desert Pavilion Chronicle. Let's see his C0 damage first to see how much his damage changes based on what weapon he's using as a point of reference. As we could see, against 3 enemies, he's going to be dealing about 1 million damage all by himself when taking into account everything other than his Ascension passives. Pretty respectable. So now let's see how his first Constellation's attack speed and Ascension 4 damage bonus impacts his damage. We'll take these on one at a time, first with just the attack speed and then with his Ascension 4 passive. With just the attack speed, we see that the extra attacks that SCARAMOUCHE can get increases his damage by 5.2% with Tule's and 7.3% with the Woodsith. The damage bonus is not dramatic, but it's a pretty decent chunk. But with his A4 passive damage added into it, we see that his damage actually lowers, mainly due to SCARAMOUCHE having to dodge and not attack. This passive is supposed to make up for it, but it's specifically single target, unlike the rest of Scar's kit, which means actively using it decreases his damage output. But how about we test the damage difference between using his Ascension 4 passive at C0 and at C1? Well, then it actually is a pretty decent amount of damage, just not a lot, as his damage only increases by 6.5% with Tule's and 8.7% with the Woodsith. So this constellation is not very good. What about his C2? What does it do and how much does it increase his damage by? SCARAMOUCHE's C2 simply increases his elemental burst's damage by 4% per points that he is missing from his fly meter, up to a max of 200%. This caps at 50 points missing, which means you only need to get his fly meter to about half to get this benefit, making it just a very strong passive 200% damage bonus. How strong is this though? Well, it's actually really strong as it increases his damage with Tule's by 17.3% from C1 and 23.4% from C0. With the Woodsith, this damage bonus is even greater, as it increases his damage by 18.4% from C1 and 27% from C0. So yeah, this constellation is quite insane. However, it does make Scara more burst reliant, as it goes from making up only about 18% of his total damage output to about 38%. So if you are struggling with energy generation somehow, this constellation is going to be pretty useless. The thing about SCARAMOUCHE is that he has minuscule energy requirements due to him being a main DPS, generating a decent amount of particles on field, having a lower energy cost on his burst, and having energy generation built into his Ascension passive. This is unlike his main competition in the Animo main DPS department, Xiao. Xiao is known to output some pretty good damage and has been a pretty stable and powerful DPS unit ever since his release. He has even been a part of the Liyue Big 3 along with Ganyu and Hu Tao, who were all considered the best of the best main DPS units of the time time back before Ayaka's debut. After that, he has continued to fall off due to many issues and clunk that the newer characters just did not have, while also having similar if not higher damage per second. So how well does he compare to Scaramouche? Well, let's test their damage outputs in their allotted time frames, but remember to keep in mind that this scenario is in a vacuum, with their signature weapons against 3 targets. On screen now are the numbers for their specific uptime. Xiao's is obviously higher, but at the cost of being on field for almost double the amount of time. That being said, given the same amount of time, Scaramouche can be seen outputting about 22% more damage than Xiao. While this may just make it seem like Scara is just a better Xiao, the latter character has larger AoEs, which will allow him to deal more damage given situations with more enemies. But that's kind of it. It seems like Scara beats him out in most other scenarios. However, Xiao beats Scara in the artifact department, as his 2 pieces are generally on equal playing field with his best 4-piece. On the other hand, Scara seems to be very 4-piece dependent on a few different artifact sets. But which one is his best? Well, let's continue to test. Here we'll test between Shimenawa's Remembrance, Echoes of the Offering, and the new Desert Pavilion Chronicle with both Tully's and the Widsith. I want to test many scenarios and see how that changed the order to get an idea of which set is the best in most situations with Scaramouche. And we won't be taking into account his Ascension 4 passive, as the damage it deals is very lackluster. Let's start in a situation against 3 enemies where everything hits all 3 enemies. As you can see, both weapons seem to favor a different artifact set. Tully seems to favor the Echo set, whereas Widsith seems to favor the Desert Pavilion set. Why is this? Well, it's actually kind of simple when you think about it, as the answer revolves around attack speed. As with all stats, you need a balance, and attack speed is no difference. So when you reach a certain attack speed amount, the need for more from the Desert Pavilion set becomes less. On the opposite end, Echoes of the Offering almost scales directly with attack speed, as it has the chance to increase the base talent multiplier of a character's normal attack. So the more attack speed you have, the better this set becomes. It also benefits a lot more from the multipliers that Tully's grants, as the set lacks at boosting that particular area in the damage calculation formula. That out of the way, I also want to see how his first Ascension passive impacts the viability of each artifact set. So let's take a look. We'll start with the Hydro Absorption, which basically grants Scaramouche another volley of normal attacks. Here we notice that now they're best to worst set, as Echoes is the best, Desert Pavilion is second, and finally Shimenawa's is last. But why does Echoes pull ahead here? Shouldn't Pavilion do better? Well, yes, but not technically, since the attack speed grants more volleys for Scara to deal damage. This is exactly the same thing that attack speed is doing for him, which is why Echoes pulls ahead. Now let's try his Pyro buff for attack percent. Here we notice it's the same situation as it is with Hydro, and nothing else really. What about Cryo with the crit bonus? Well, here we see something weird. The new hierarchy is Echoes, Shimenawa, then Pavilion. Now you may be asking, why is Shimenawa's better here? That's because of the balanced stats it offers for the damage calculation formula. Shimenawa's just has the extra bit of attack percent to push it just ahead of Pavilion, which offers more multipliers and some extra attacks. For one last comparison, I wanted to test the impact that a C6 Faruzan would have on his artifact set options, plus the buffs he gets from Pyro and Cryo. And for another measure of comparison, I wanted to use the second most voted weapon in the poll, which turned out to be the Solar Pearl, to see if that had an impact on anything. So let's see if anything changes. And it looks like it does a little bit. There are 2 patterns we could see throughout all weapons. The first observation is that Echoes is just better by about 4.5% for the 2 4-star options, and by a staggering 10% with Tully's, because they pair so well with one another. The other observation is that the other 2 sets, Shimenawa's and Pavilion, are about equal in value, with Pavilion being better by only 0.15% between all weapons. So Echoes of the Offering is surprisingly his best known slot artifact set. But should you actually use it? Well, in my opinion, no. Why not? Well, there's a lot of reasons. The upside for this artifact set is its raw damage output. For a signature weapon, you are only looking at a boost of about 5.5% in his damage. With Widsith, it's only 3%, and with Faruzan, it's only about 6.6%. However, that's the only upside. The downsides are more plentiful. The domain it resides in is incredibly terrible to farm for, as you're only farming for Ayato, Xiao, and now Scaramouche. That's it. By contrast, the other 2 domains have artifact sets that can be used and are the best in slot sets for a vast amount of characters in the game. Not to mention, this set has RNG on it to work, which forces you to have a minimum of 80% crit rate to have any sort of consistency with this set. This is just the start though. If you have bad ping, this set just straight up does not work. There's also the fact that attack buffs or flat damage buffs lessen the gap between this set and the other sets. So if you pair Scaramouche with characters characters like Yunjin, Bennett, and Kujosara, or use buffs from Noblesse, Tenacity, Wolf's Gravestone, and Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer, this set becomes basically useless. That being said, I would say that the new Desert Pavilion Chronicle is his best all-around set. Surprising, I know. Normally at this point I would move on to weapons, but I want to take a look back at his Ascension 1 passive because there's something that might not have been obvious then that I want to point out. Take a look at Scaramouche's damage numbers. What do I want you to notice? Well, simply the fact that the Hydro buff is the buff from his Ascension 1 passive that grants Scaramouche the highest damage per rotation than the other two. The other thing is that Scaramouche has no other access to duration increases, except for her C6, unlike attack speed, attack percent, and crit, which makes this buff not only his best in this situation, but also almost immune to the diminishing returns that other stats easily reach. This simply means that Hydro appears to be Scaramouche's best partner element in all situations. It also means that weapons that do not have high uptime on passive effects to last the extra duration will suffer more than others because of this. These weapons would include the Widsith and the Solar Pearl, but a weapon like the Lost Prayer would actually benefit highly from the Hydro buff. Another thing I would like to take note of is the damage of his charge attacks and whether or not they're actually worth using. I'll quickly show this off using the Widsith and Tully's. If we consider that his first two normal attacks, his third normal attack, and his charge attack all take up a similar amount of time, we could use these to weigh what his best combo is. First are his two first normal attacks, which deal the most amount of damage when put together. Then we have his charge attack for both weapons, which deals the second most damage, and lastly is his third normal attack, but by different degrees based on weapon. If these all take up the same amount of time, then we definitely want his first two normal attacks, so we're not going to want to charge attack mindlessly. But we do see that his charge attack is better than his third normal attack, so from this we can determine that he deals the most damage by using two normal attacks and then a charged attack. However, this will not be the case under a few circumstances. One is with Yunjin, since she only buffs normal attacks. Second is with a lot of attack speed, since his charge attack does not benefit from the extra attack speed. And the last situation is with Echoes of the Offering, since, like Yunjin, it does not impact charged attacks. Certain weapons like Tully's or Solar Pearl also incentivize the use of normal attacks more, but not to such an extreme degree that you don't want to charged attack. Merely evens the playing field between the two. I guess this leads me to his best weapons, as we'll have to keep these things in mind for weapon options, but I will not incorporate them into the calculations for the sake of weapon diversity. For all these weapons, I'm using his best set, the Desert Pavilion Chronicle. Tully's is first for obvious reasons. Next up is actually Memory of Dust, specifically because he has such high multipliers and easy access to crit. If you have no other synergies that impact the base value of Scaramouche's calculations, this weapon is fantastic, and it's only beaten by his signature by a mere 1.6%. Up next is the Widsith, since it just deals insane damage all the time. It's incredible. Just behind that, we have the Skyward Atlas. It's an incredible option, not only offering an insane attack modifier, but also elemental damage percent and its own damage procs. After that, we have Lost Prayer, which is able to compete, just not very well. After that is the average damage for Blacklift, due to the absurd attack stats it grants and crit stats. But this weapon archetype can be annoying to use, so just know it's not for everyone. Then we have the Solar Pearl, taking into account both the passive being active for his normal attacks and the few normals that he will do when the passive effect is gone. Despite the fact that its passive does not last too long, it's still able to hold up very well and stays as one of his best dolphin options. After that is Dodo Tails for the attack percent and charge attack damage. After that are weapons you shouldn't really go, and let's be honest, you deserve an upgrade. They don't treat you right. While these are his highest damage weapon options on paper, I expect things to change with him in practice. That being said, I would obviously recommend his signature weapon first, as it's just the best on him. Second is Memory of Dust. The requirement for a shield on Memory is almost nothing too, since Scara has piss poor knockback resistance while he's flying, so you're going to want a shield or Xiao. Then there's Lost Prayer. This weapon is really strong for Scaramouche, but with the increase to the duration of his skill with a Hydro unit, I expect this weapon to be even better in practice than on paper. Skyward Atlas would be a more consistent option, but I also expect it to be a bit worse depending on the situation. Then we have the Widsith and Solar Pearl. Despite the fact that they don't pair well with his Hydro Absorption passive effect, they are still strong in the other situations. Widsith even has the capability to outskill his signature weapon and burst something down real quick, but you'll only get its effect every other rotation. Then there's Dodo Tails, which just covers the weaknesses of Scara very well while not overcompensating like Widsith. After that is Blacklift for its stats, though it may be inconsistent. Then we have Oathsworn for the attack percent and energy recharge that pairs really well with it in many situations. Crossbearer is good too, but only for a cryo team comp, otherwise it's useless. After that is Hakushin Ring, which when paired with his energy generating Ascension 1 passive effect, has the capabilities to get Scara's elemental burst back without needing need to build into any extra energy recharge. After that is the Twin Nefret, because it's just pretty weak. Time for team synergies. As mentioned before, Scaramouche pairs really well with 3 types of units: major buffers, shielders, and hydro characters. Oh Candace, if only that were you. Anyways, you have a few options. For hydro characters, you have Yulan, who can help buff Scaramouche as well as grant him that extra duration on his skill. However, there's also Xiao, who applies hydro, will shred the resistances of Scaramouche's swirls, and will grant Scara the knockback resistance that he needs to thrive mid-air. Kokomi can also work pretty well if you want to run a freeze team so you don't get knocked around, but the other two are just better. The second slot that needs to be filled is the shielder role if you aren't running Xiao. There are some amazing options here, as all of them have their merit. Toma is great for the major 50% attack percent buffing he can grant Scaramouche on top of the 15% normal charged and plunging attack damage he grants from his C6. You could also just run a Thrilling Tales tank Fae with Noblesse for that 98% attack percent bonus. That's 800 plus attack for anyone wondering. Other options you have are Diona, who can heal and increase the movement speed of Scaramouche while also shielding. Layla is another option you have, who can also grant attack percent through tenacity and will help battery the Shman. Finally, we have Zhongli, who could take on the role of a debuffer, as he is one of the only 2 characters who can shred Anemo resistance. His resistance shred is only 10% less than his competition, Faruzan, so it's not like you're losing too much other than damage by choosing him over her. This leads me to his buffing options. As stated before, Faruzan is going to be his main buffing support, as she offers Anemo damage buffing, Anemo crit damage buffing, Anemo resistance shred, and flat damage increases for Anemo damage. She has all the support in minor amounts, but when added up, it makes her uncontested the best support for Anemo main DPS characters. Other characters you can pick are the likes of Yunjin for her major flat damage buff on Scaramouche's normal attacks. That with a bunch of attack speed would make even Oz cower. Another buffer is Bennett for that major attack boosting potential. You have some very good options here, but if you're looking for a best to worst list, I got you. C6 for Ruzan is his best support, as she will not only buff Scaramouche to similar yet lower heights as the other characters, but she also acts as a sub DPS option, which the other 2 can't do. Then there's Faruzan, not at C6, who still offers amazing support and pretty great damage too, though it's not that much. After that is Bennett for the huge attack buffs that will allow Scaramouche to nuke everyone and everything. His buff is about 12% better than Faruzan's at C6, but he offers none of the damage that she does. However, he does offer him the pyro attack percent bonus from Scaramouche's Ascension 1 passive, which helps him out quite a lot. After that is Yunjin at C6, and then below as her buff is only 7.4% better at C6, but with none of the damage. And then obviously it gets worse with lower constellations. From what we can tell, Scaramouche has a lot of options for team building, but he has one guaranteed BFF in Faruzan. His next BFF is an elemental character that prevents him from getting sniped out of the sky while granting him a buff for his first Ascension passive, specifically Xiao with Layla, Diona, or Toma falling slightly behind. After that, another elemental character will do more than fine with him. This would include Bennett, Shengling, Yulan, Beidou, Rosaria, or Fischl. You could also use him more as a driver and go the Yulan and Xiao core along with another character like Beidou to act as a high-flying tasing orb, Diona or Layla to act as a high-flying freezing orb, or Toma to act as a high-flying vaping orb. Sounds like a Dendro thing. But if you struggle with team building, just remember a simple and easy core to go with Scara is Faruzan and Xiao, as this 2-piece combo fits all of Scaramouche's requirements with ease. So how does Scara hold up? Well, he has some good and bad with him. That should be mentioned. Scaramouche is an Anemo main DPS character with some insanely good damage and a minor AoE. On top of this, he has some very strong self-buffing capabilities to increase his very solid DPS even higher. He also is very simple to play and requires little management past spamming his normal attack button. His team versatility is extremely diverse and free-to-play friendly, as some of his best teammates are 4-stars. In fact, out of the 11 teammates I recommended for him, only 3 were 5-star units, and all of those were substitutes. He also has very little energy issues, and if you do find that you have energy issues on him, a simple Fischl will make up for all of that. He also just happens to be immune to all attacks that strike toward the ground since he can fly. However, he still does have downsides. A major one is that he is Anemo. Since he is Anemo, he has no sources of reactions that amplify his own damage. While this can matter very little for some characters in order for them to see major success, characters with this issue tend to do worse than others just based on their elemental damage. However, there are some situations where even with damage amplification elemental reactions, a character might still not be up to snuff because of low damage numbers, lack of utility, or clunk. There's also the fact that while he may have very versatile team building options, he still has strict limits. He also has some not too great weapon options outside of 5-stars and the Widsit, making him pretty expensive in the weapon department. But other than those few things, he doesn't seem too bad, and it looks like everything can just be worked around. So how does Scaramouche look? Well, to be honest, he looks incredibly strong. Not to the same degree as his mother, but for a main DPS, it looks like he can contend with some of the best. He is definitely no slouch and seems to be the best Animo main DPS in the game. Sorry, Xiao. His versatility is also incredibly nice, as it allows for a lot of experimentation and allows him to shine in compositions where his competitor, Xiao, straight up cannot. That being said, I think I shall give this wannabe Archon a solid 4.5 out of 5 stars, due to the reasons mentioned above. Anyways, what do you think about Scaramouche? Do you think he's going to be strong? Do you think he's incredibly weak? Do you have any funky compositions you're going to put him into? Tell me in the comments down below. But with that, I wish you all farewell. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you all have a fantastic day. Bye bye!